of Mark's gospel. Even though it appears here in Mark probably about halfway through, and it's about, the first half of the gospel for sure has been about the reign of God or the building of the kingdom. Here it is. And in Mark, and I don't know if any of you remember this, but Mark wrote the shortest of the four gospels. I think we've talked about that before. He doesn't write at length about anything. And yet here he spends 16 verses telling us about Herod and the beheading of John the Baptist. And we're like, why do we even have this in your gospel? Why did you take so long to tell us about it? And it's the only story in Mark's gospel in which Jesus does not appear. It is the only story in Mark's gospel that is told in flashback. No other story, if you read the gospel, uses that literary device. So we look at this and we go, really? Why did Mark put this story here? Why did he put it in the middle of his gospel? Why did he spend so much time writing it? And why are we reading it today in the middle of July? And so it came to me, maybe it's not about what Herod does, but why Herod does what he does. Maybe the story needs us to focus on ego and regulation. Because it seems as we share this gospel that Herod really liked being in relationship with John. And even though John kept saying to him, you're doing the wrong thing, you really are not in right relationship with your brother, with his wife, with God, he still was drawn to John. When I looked further at this passage, I found that David Luce had written about it as well. And one of the things he said is, this is a story that is really parable-like. And the thing that makes a parable, as we've talked about already, is that it doesn't cease to judge as much as it ceases to contrast. It actually takes what we know of the world we live in, the world that Herod oversaw, if you will, and ruled, and the kingdom of God, and it keeps juxtaposing them one against the other. So we see the contrast. We see the contrast between Herod's world and Jesus and God's kingdom. The difference between a world about power and abuse of power and a world about a kingdom where people serve and minister and love one another. A world ruled by a person who is insecure and exploited, and one who acts with integrity and compassion. The difference between a world about ego and a world about regulation. That's the contrast that we see here. And I think that's why, gruesome as it is, the story is here for us to ponder. Jesus, in the building of his and God's kingdom of sisters and brothers in the one human family, is determined to free God's people from whatever it is that holds them bound. And I still say, and I still believe, and that's why I say it, that what most holds Herod bound and what most holds us bound is fear. Leaving inherit aside, what is it that holds us bound when we think about what we're afraid of? Are we afraid when we go to the doctor that there will be some new diagnosis that is even more dire and scary than one we've had in the past? Are we, in the end, afraid of death? I think what most holds us bound are not those fears, but these. The fear of embarrassment. The fear that talks about appearance, perhaps money, and the things we do or do not have. I'm embarrassed because my blank isn't as nice as blank's blank. You got one in that, did you? In the powder room at my brother and sister-in-law's house in Camillus, New York, there's a little sign, I guess, you know, one of those little wood plaques that people put places that says, "The best things in life are not things." And every time I go in there, which is more frequent now that I'm older, every time I go in there, that's the only reading material in that bathroom. And your eye is drawn to it. And my heart is drawn to it as well, because I think, wow, everybody who comes in here to wash their hands or whatever, that using the first floor powder room, sees this as a reminder that the best things in life are things. The best things in life are people. And how we love, and care for, and tend, look out for, hold up, support each other. Day after day, week after week, and many of us year after year, for some of us, hour after hour. There's also the fear of failure. Anybody ever have that one? You know, I remember being a teacher and fearing that I would fail at teaching what needed really to be taught. I remember being a very young pastor, not young in age, but young in experience, of a brand new church, and fearing that it would fail. That one has held me bound for some time. Do we fear failure in relationship, in accomplishment, in promotion, in jobs? How about the fear of disappointing someone else? Ever had that one? When we're a kid, there are adults in our lives that we fear we will disappoint. And then when we're adults, there are kids in our lives that we fear will disappoint. It seems we get it all the time. It seems to me that these fears that most hold us bound are often fears about ego and right relation in some way. And it seems to me, to the point where I now have to leave the room sometimes when the news is on, that our world today is full of people obsessed with satisfying their own ego and desire for power. But here's what I know. There are more people who do not make the news, not even in a footnote, who value their own and other people's personhood and integrity. There are more people in our world that value the holy and human family we've been given. There are more people in our world that value the call we hear echoing to us over the eons from the prophet Micah. We who value the call to act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with our God. And so I have to ask, what does this passage mean for us today? Is it a call to judge, or is it a call to serve? As I was thinking about this quote came to me, and so I had to Google it and figure out who said it, and it's attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. My guess is most of us have heard it. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Small minds discuss people. If we choose not to be part of judgment, we have to let go of judging people. Now, in our family, that's known as gossip. And as my mother told me years ago before she died, but if it's family, then it's not gossip. So, we spent a lot of time with family these past 2 weeks, talking about each other, especially the people that work in the room. And here's what I decided. That my rule for gossip and judging people and being small-minded will be this. That I will say nothing about anybody that I have not or will not say to them in person. Not would not or could not, what I either have said to them in person, or I promise I will say to them in person. Have you thought about what this means? You know, sometimes you get in a situation where you don't even have to do that, because with our daughter-in-law, she was talking about her relationship with her son and how she enables him. She goes, yep, I'm the biggest enabler around and I just know it and it's all good. Oh no, she said it's all good, because I just know it. So it was like, okay then, there's nothing else to say. Except I have to say, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what an awakening when he gets to college next week. But I think that's true. And so I say, I think the message here is, let us be people of great mind. The great minds that discuss ideas, that want to solve problems, not just lay them at other people's feet or blame other people for them. And while I was thinking that about us, I remembered this quote, and I can't believe how old I am, that it was said 50 years ago by Ted Kennedy as he eulogized his brother Bobby. Maybe you'll remember it when you hear it. He said of his brother, he was a man, a person, who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. I think if we become people of great minds not Herods who shrink before the condemnation or censure of their friends and do something they don't really want to do. We don't become that. We become these people of great minds who discuss ideas and whose actions are those of serving and ministering so that healing takes place and wrong is righted and wars are put to an end. I think when we do that, we become not persons self-absorbed with our own image and power, but persons created in the very image of God, who act in and with justice, who love with mercy and compassion, and walk at peace with our God, who guides our steps on the way to peace, who carries us when we grow weary, until the day that God sets us back on our feet and we dance with the God of our hearts. That's